May 1945. Lower Silesia. The Eastern Front is not a line. It is a rotting carcass, picked apart by crows and wolves. The air is a viscous soup of smoke, pollen from shattered pine forests, and the sweet, cloying stench of death that no spring breeze can scatter. Captain Lev Berezhnoi moves through this world like an automaton, his Smersh uniform a crust of mud and dried sweat. But his eyes, a piercing cool blue, are alive. They burn with a conviction that has somehow survived the meat grinders of Stalingrad and Kursk. He believes in the holy, terrible justice of their advance. He believes every shattered German town, every burned Tiger tank, is a brick in the foundation of a new and righteous world. This belief is the core of him, the last clean thing. The orders come in a commandeered Schloss, its grand hall reeking of damp plaster and field rations. The man who gives them is Colonel Vladimir Gromov of the NKVD. Gromov is not a soldier of the front. He is a creature of the deep rear, of sound-proofed rooms and midnight trains. His face is pale, placid, utterly devoid of the weathering of campaign. His voice is a dry, precise instrument. He speaks of intercepts, of whispers from broken SS officers, of a phantom. A train, not a military train, a special transport, designated Gitard Marung. It fled the collapsing fortress of Breslau, laden not with troops, but with the extracted marrow of the Reich, the final plunder. Its destination was a knot of mountains and ancient forests, a place of Nazi mystery called Project Reese, the Giant. Its last known location, a primary railway tunnel bored into the bowels of the Sobieski Massif. Intelligence suggests the entrance was sealed. Captain Berezhnoi's task is to find it, secure it, and prevent any loss or destruction. Gromov's pale eyes fix on him. Every single item, Captain, is a state asset. You will account for every single item. You will secure everything. Clarity is your only duty. For 3 days, Berezhnoi and his hand-picked squad move like ghosts through the chaotic hinterland. They bypass firefights, their objective a siren call more urgent than petty combat. They follow rusted railway spurs that dead-end in thickets of new growth. They find a Polish railwayman, hollow-eyed and trembling, in a root cellar. The man speaks in a frantic hiss of a night of screaming steel and diesel, of a train of impossible length, dragged into the mountain's maw by 2 shrieking locomotives, followed by the thunder of deliberate demolition. He draws a shaking line on Berezhnoi's map. They find the place. The tunnel entrance is a raw, new wound in the granite face. A chaotic avalanche of boulders and splintered timber, dust still floating in the shafts of weak sunlight. The air vibrates with a profound, unnatural silence. Berezhnoi's men work with frantic, silent urgency, muscles cording, clearing a narrow, treacherous passage into the darkness. The tunnel swallows them. The temperature plummets. The sound of their breathing, the scuff of boots, becomes enormous. Their flashlight beams are feeble swords against a blackness so complete it feels solid. And then the light strikes steel. A buffer, a wheel, a riveted wall. The train materializes from the void, a colossal, silent serpent, stretched into infinity. It does not seem parked. It seems entombed. Berezhnoi signals. Crowbars bite into the sealed door of a freight car with a shriek that echoes down the stone throat. The wood splinters. His beam of light spears inside. It does not find neat stacks of ingots. It falls upon a chaos of gold. A torrent of objects vomited from 1,000 looted lives. A Baroque crucifix, larger than a man, lies tangled in a nest of gilded picture frames. Solid silver tableware from Parisian mansions, is piled like scrap metal against sacks spilling thousands of wedding bands, watch cases, and thimbles. A child's gold locket glints against the dusty boot of a Soviet soldier. The light trembles in Berezhnoy's hand. This is not treasure. This is a frozen scream. The sheer, grotesque weight of it, the intimate, profane scale of the theft, steals the air from his lungs. His belief in a clear, surgical victory trembles. Another wagon reveals canvases, slashed and stacked like lumber. The serene face of a Madonna is pressed against a bleak, modernist landscape. Another is a cavern of strange, heavy machinery, ominous and unrecognizable. A third is stacked to the ceiling with metal filing cabinets and oak crates stenciled with Gothic script and eagle insignias. The archive of a nightmare. Then a sound. Not from the treasure. From the absolute blackness at the rear of this metallic tomb. A low, wet, collective murmur. The sound of breath in ruined lungs. The shift of a body with no strength left. Berezhnoy's blood turns to ice. He moves, his boots echoing a frantic rhythm. He reaches a different type of wagon, a cattle car, its heavy door secured by a thick external bolt. He throws it back. The door slides open a foot with a deafening rumble. The horror does not roll out. It strikes. A wall of stench, a physical, viscous assault of putrefaction, chlorine, and human waste. It makes his eyes water. His flashlight beam, now a violating instrument, cuts through the gloom. He sees limbs, not bodies, anatomical sketches rendered in bone and yellowed skin, draped in coarse, striped cloth. Dozens of them, a tangle of discarded humanity. Eyes, wide and depthless, reflect the light like those of trapped animals. They do not plead, they simply are, a proof of existence at the very brink of its extinction. One figure closer to the door, a man whose age is impossible to determine, lifts a claw-like hand not in supplication, but as if to shield himself from the light. His shaved skull is a map of scars and bruises. His gaze meets Berezhnoy's. In it, there is no hope, no accusation. There is only a vast, silent knowing, a witness to the absolute bottom. In that single searing moment, Lev Berezhnoy's world fractures. The clear architecture of his belief, the righteous Soviet soldier liberating Europe from evil, shatters into a million glittering, hateful shards. He is not a liberator standing before plunder. He is a man standing at the gaping mouth of an abyss, and the abyss is made of gold and human suffering, inextricably fused. The train is not just a prize. It is the incarnate, mobile truth of the horror they have fought. And it is here, in his custody. His training reasserts itself, a robotic protocol. He barks orders, his voice strange to his own ears. Water. Medics. Now. His men scramble, their faces pale with a new kind of shock. Mechanically, Berezhnoy removes his trophy, a small, precise Leica camera taken from a dead SS Sturmbannf, rare near Poznan. He begins to document. Not as an inventory clerk for the state, but as a witness for a tribunal that must exist somewhere, in some future where right and wrong still have meaning. The waterfall of looted piety, the slashed art, the dead-eyed machinery. He turns the lens, with a shuddering breath, toward the cattle car. The light frames the lifted claw hand, the hollow eyes, the striped uniforms. Click. The sound is obscenely loud. Evidence. This must be evidence. Hours pass in a blur of controlled chaos. His men distribute their own rations to the liberated prisoners, who eat with a terrifying, silent voracity. Then a new sound penetrates the tunnel, the deep-throated growl of heavy, unfamiliar engines. Colonel Gromov arrives. He steps into the circle of lantern light, his long NKVD greatcoat pristine, his boots gleaming. He surveys the scene. His pale eyes sweep over the mountains of sacred gold, over the stacked records of tyranny, and finally, rest on the emaciated figures being helped from the cattle car. His expression does not change. It is the same placid, administrative mask. He nods once to himself, as if checking items on a mental list. He turns to Berezhnoi. "Your duty is fulfilled, Captain. My department will assume control." His voice holds no warmth, no congratulation. It is a statement of pure, logistical fact. What happens next unfolds with a chilling, pre-rehearsed efficiency. Gromov's own men, sharper, colder, moving with the quiet assurance of a secret police, flow into the tunnel. They are not soldiers. They are clerks with guns. They begin the transfer, but Berezhnoi's sharp, now suspicious eyes immediately detect the bifurcation. The surviving prisoners are escorted out, handed to a waiting medical battalion, a legitimate, visible stream. The crates of bullion, the church plate, the paintings, are loaded onto a convoy of standard Red Army trucks, their cargo logs being meticulously filled out. But the sealed archive wagons, and a specific selection of crates, the ones containing the most portable, most liquid assets, the bags of coins, the small, priceless antiquities, are diverted. They are loaded onto a separate line of unmarked heavy-duty lorries, their canvas covers drawn tight. This operation is supervised directly by Gromov's personal guards, who form a silent, impenetrable cordon around them. No cargo logs are visible here. Berezhnoi approaches, his own notepad in hand, the first truthful draft of his report. "Comrade Colonel," he begins, his voice tight, "the procedure for the inventory. My documentation must reflect the complete." Gromov turns. He does not look at Berezhnoi's face, but at the notepad. Slowly, deliberately, he reaches out. His hand, pale and soft, closes around the top sheet. Without a word, without a change in expression, he tears it from the pad. The sound is shockingly violent in the cavernous space. He folds the paper once and again and lets it fall to the muddy ground. It lands near a discarded gold fountain pen. "You will document," Gromov says, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate register that is more terrifying than any shout, "what is officially recorded." The train contained valuable industrial equipment and materials useful for the reconstruction of the motherland. It was discovered empty of personnel. Your photographs, Captain. All of them. The film is a state resource. Berezhnoi stares at him. The fracture in his world widens into a yawning chasm. He sees not a superior officer, but the system itself, limitless, cold, capable of rewriting reality with a whisper. He thinks of the claw hand in his viewfinder. He thinks of the knowing eyes. If that truth is erased, what was it all for? The fear is sudden and chemical, a sour taste at the back of his throat. It is not just fear of Gromov, but fear of the vast, silent machinery Gromov represents. A machine that grinds up truths and men with equal indifference. His own hand, moving as if detached from his body, reaches into his field pouch. He pulls out the Leica. For a fleeting second, his thumb brushes against a small, hard cylinder in a separate pocket. The spare roll of film, the one he had loaded that morning in the Schloss, the one he had forgotten, until now. He hands the camera to Gromov. A guard takes it, opens the back, and exposes the film to the harsh lantern light, with a casual, practiced flick of the wrist. The physical record of the cattle car, of the fused horror and gold, is annihilated in a burst of meaningless light. Gromov gives a final dismissive nod and turns back to oversee his men. The unmarked lorries begin to rumble to life, their secret cargo swallowed by the tunnel's darkness, heading not west, but east, deeper, into the Soviet zone. Captain Lev Berezhnoy stands rooted in the spot. The roar of engines mixes with the distant cries of the prisoners and the sharp, transactional shouts of the NKVD men. The gold is gone. The truth is gone. All that remains is the crushing weight of the secret now lodged in his soul, and the cold, metallic touch of a single, unexposed roll of film burning like a coal against his thigh. His war is over. A new, much quieter, and infinitely more terrible one has just begun. The world outside the tunnel was a different kind of darkness. A moonless night in Lower Silesia, the sky a vast, indifferent velvet strewn with cold, sharp stars. The convoy of standard army trucks, now bearing the officially sanctioned portion of the treasure, and the unmarked NKVD lorries carrying the secret, diverged at a crossroads marked by a splintered signpost. One column turned towards the established Soviet military command posts. The other, Gromov's column, dissolved into the deeper, unmapped forest shadows. Lev Berezhnoy watched the red taillights of those unmarked trucks vanish, feeling not like a victorious captain, but like a man who had just witnessed a perfect, silent crime. The evidence was the fading rumble of engines. The accomplice was his own silence. His return to the temporary regimental headquarters was a journey through a phantom landscape. The familiar sights of war, the burned-out half-tracks, the clusters of exhausted infantry huddled around cans of stew, the distant, hollow thump of artillery, now seemed like a staged play. He had seen behind the curtain. The engine of history was not propelled by heroism and ideology alone, but by a colder, greasier machinery. The thought coiled in his gut, a sick, heavy thing. The headquarters was a hive of frantic, celebratory energy. Teletypes chattered, mapping the final collapse of Berlin. Officers laughed too loudly, passing bottles of captured schnapps. The air smelled of cheap tobacco, sweat, and impending victory. Berezhnoy moved through this chaos like a ghost. He was sent to the Intelligence Bureau, a cramped room in the cellar of a requisitioned schoolhouse. The walls were plastered with maps, red arrows thrusting deep into the heart of Germany. Here, the reality of the tunnel had to be formalized, codified, entered into the immutable record of the Great Patriotic War. He sat on a wobbly wooden chair, a stack of blank forms before him. The official inventory and debriefing form for captured enemy materiel. The pencil in his hand felt like a lead weight. He started writing, his script initially firm, a soldier's report. Object: one sealed railway transport. Location: tunnel, at grid reference. Then he reached the section for contents. His mind flashed. The avalanche of gold crosses and wedding rings, the slashed Rembrandt, the weight of a gold bar he had hefted, its cold density shocking, the files, thousands of them, detailing transactions, confiscations, transports to camps with code names, and then the image that obliterated all others, the shaft of his flashlight illuminating the cattle car, the skeletal figure raising its hand, the eyes, the profound silent knowing in those eyes. That was the true content. Not gold, not art. That gaze was the core of it all. He wrote, primary contents, assorted precious metals in raw and fabricated form, estimated weight, cultural artifacts of significant value, industrial machinery of unknown purpose, archived administrative documents. Secondary contents, approximately 35 detainees in critical condition, liberated from transport and transferred to Medical Unit 447. He stared at the words detainees and liberated. They were lies of omission, sanitized, bloodless words that formed a crust over the raw, suppurating truth. Each letter he had written felt like a betrayal of the man in the cattle car. He saw Gromov's pale, placid face, the casual tearing of the paper. The message had been clear. The narrative belonged to the state. The truth was a disposable, even dangerous, commodity. The door to the cellar office opened without a knock. Colonel Gromov entered, followed by a thin, severe captain who carried a leather-bound folder. The celebratory noise from the corridor was cut off as the door closed, leaving the three men in a pool of harsh electric light. Gromov did not look at Berezhnoi. He surveyed the room as if inspecting a barracks, his eyes lingering on the maps of final victory. "Your report is ready, Captain?" Gromov's voice was dry, a bureaucrat's query. Berezhnoi pushed the filled form across the desk. Gromov picked it up, scanned it with unsettling speed. His expression did not change, but a faint, almost imperceptible tension tightened the skin around his eyes as he read the line about the detainees. He held the paper out to the severe captain without a word. The captain produced a fresh, identical form from his folder and placed it on the desk before Berezhnoi. This form was already partially filled. The grid reference was the same. The description of the train was identical, but the section on contents was different. It read, "Primary contents, industrial machine parts, electrical components, and non-ferrous scrap metal suitable for smelting and reuse in reconstruction efforts. Secondary contents, nil. No personnel found aboard transport." Berezhnoi's breath caught in his chest. The air in the room grew thick, pressurized. He looked from the pristine lie on the new form to Gromov's impassive face. This was not a request for clarification. This was an erasure, a surgical, complete annihilation of what had been. The gold, the art, the archives, the people, all reduced to scrap metal. It was an act of violence more profound than any shelling. It murdered history itself. Gromov finally looked at him. His pale eyes held no threat, no malice. They held only the absolute certainty of power. "The initial assessment is often clouded by fatigue, Captain. The excitement of discovery. My specialists have conducted a more thorough evaluation. This," he tapped the new form with a single clean finger, "is the accurate inventory. You will sign it." The unspoken words hung in the air, heavier than any spoken threat. The promise of a different future. One path led forward. A path where Lev Berezhnoi, hero of the Sobieski Tunnel, would continue his service. The other path led into a different kind of darkness, one without stars or crossroads. It was the darkness of an unmarked grave, of a file stamped resolved, of being transformed into a non-person, his own existence rendered as nil. Berezhnoi's gaze dropped to the form. The words non-ferrous scrap metal blurred. In his mind, he saw the unmarked lorries disappearing into the forest. He saw the exhausted prisoners being loaded onto ambulances, their liberation already being stripped of its context. He felt the cold, hard cylinder of the spare film roll still in his pocket, a secret against his thigh. That tiny object was now the only repository of the truth. To preserve it, he had to deny it. A profound, weary coldness seeped into his bones. It was not the fire of righteous anger, but the ice of survival. The idealistic young captain who had entered the tunnel was gone, shattered by the sight of the cattle car. Now, a different man had to step forward, a man who could carry a secret without breaking. He understood now that his duty was no longer to a grand, clean ideal, but to a tiny, fragile sliver of evidence, and to his own continued existence as its guardian. He picked up the pencil. His hand was perfectly steady. He did not look at Gromov. He looked only at the signature line. He signed his name. The graphite scratched against the cheap paper, a sound like a key turning in a lock, sealing him inside a lie. He was no longer a witness. He was now a co-author of the official fiction. Gromov gave a small, satisfied nod. The severe captain collected the signed form, placing it reverently in his leather folder. The original truthful report was taken, and with a swift, practiced motion, the captain struck a match. He held the corner of the paper to the flame. It caught, curling black, the words detainees and cultural artifacts consumed by fire, turning to fragile gray ash that flaked onto the stone floor. Gromov turned and left without another word, his boots silent on the steps. Berezhnoi remained seated, staring at the small pile of ash on the floor. The celebratory noises from the hall washed over him, meaningless now. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The war outside was ending, but within him a deeper, more silent conflict had ignited. It was a war of memory against record, of a hidden truth against an empowered lie. And he had just fired the first, cowardly shot in his own surrender. The stain of that moment, of his own signature on the fiction, would not wash off. It was a stain he would carry for a lifetime, a constant aching reminder of the day he traded his conscience for a future, and of the tiny metallic secret that now bore the unbearable weight of everything he had just agreed to forget. 70 years is a layer of sediment. It settles over history, over cities, over the human heart. Moscow in the present day is a city of frantic, gleaming towers that claw at the sky, a metropolis of light and noise that has buried its past under layers of glass and reinforced concrete. Yet, in quiet pockets, islands of an older world persist. One such island is apartment 17 on the 5th floor of a well-kept pre-war building on a quiet lane near the Arbat. This is the home of Lev Berezhnoi. Time has transformed the sharp-featured, blue-eyed Smersh captain into a man of 95. The ice blue of his eyes has faded to a pale, watery gray, but they remain strikingly alert. Windows to a mind that has never stopped its meticulous, silent work. His body is a map of old pains and slow decay, but he holds himself with a formal military straightness that refuses to surrender completely to gravity. His apartment is not a home. It is a meticulously curated museum dedicated to a single acceptable version of his life. The walls are lined with bookshelves bowing under the weight of historical treatises, memoirs of the Great Patriotic War, and his own published works, dry, precise analyses of military logistics and partisan operations in the Western theater. Framed certificates from veterans' associations and academic societies hang in precise alignment. A glass display case holds his medals: the Order of the Red Star, the Medal for Courage, the Order of the Patriotic War. They are polished to a blinding sheen, not out of pride, but out of ritual. They are the shields, the official proof of who he is supposed to be. The centerpiece of the main room is his desk, an old, heavy thing of dark wood. It is an oasis of perfect, obsessive order. Pens are aligned at a perfect right angle to a pristine blotter. Stacks of note cards for his latest, never-to-be-finished monograph on Soviet radio intelligence are squared with geometrical precision. It is the desk of a man who has spent a lifetime controlling the narrative, ordering chaos. One fact, one date, one approved memory at a time. The only element of softness in this austere exhibit is his granddaughter, Olya. At 28, she is a creature of the new Moscow, all sharp intelligence and restless energy. She lives with him, an arrangement born of practicality and a deep, unspoken bond. Her presence is marked by a contrasting disorder. A modern laptop charging on a side table, a bright scarf draped over a chair, the faint scent of her coffee lingering in the air. She is a journalist for a respected independent online publication, her focus on historical investigations and corruption. She treats her grandfather with a mixture of fierce love and gentle teasing, a beacon of vibrant, messy life in his museum of the past. One evening, the two worlds collide. The quiet is broken by the rapid, assertive tap of Olya's fingers on her keyboard. She is coiled on the sofa, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow, her expression one of focused intensity. She has been delving into newly digitized archives from the German Federal Ministry of Finance, tracing the labyrinthine paths of Nazi gold. "Dedushka," she says, her voice cutting through the silence. She doesn't look up. Listen to this. It's a memo from April 1945, a directive from some SS Obersturmbannführer to the Reichsbank liaison. They're talking about a special consolidation, not just bullion. They mention the Hohenzollern collection, the Posen Cathedral treasury, and something coded Action Erntedank, Operation Harvest Thanksgiving. They were packing it all into a dedicated train for evacuation east to the Ries secure zone. They were going to bury it, or use it as a bargaining chip. Can you imagine? Lev, sitting in his worn leather armchair with a book on his lap, does not move. But every muscle in his body tenses. The words are like surgical probes, scraping against the ancient calcified scar tissue in his mind. Special consolidation. Ries. The sounds are physical, unlocking a vault he sealed 70 years ago. The air in the room seems to grow thinner. Olya continues, her excitement building. The trail goes cold, obviously, but there are these persistent local legends in Lower Silesia around the Sobieski Mountain. Farmers, amateur historians, they talk about a gold train the Soviets found, that it was stuffed with more than just army supplies, that it just vanished into official records. She finally looks up, her eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt. What if it's true? What if that train wasn't just a myth? The scale of it. It would rewrite the entire history of post-war reparations. She turns the laptop screen towards him. It shows a scanned document, the Gothic script stark and menacing even in digitized form. Next to it is a modern-day photograph of a wooded hillside, the overgrown entrance to a railway tunnel just visible. Lev Berezhnoy looks at the screen. For a fleeting, unguarded moment, the carefully constructed persona of the retired historian shatters. His pale eyes widen, not with interest, but with a raw, unprocessed shock. He sees not a digital image, but the damp, cold granite of the tunnel wall. He smells not the apartment's dust and old paper, but the metallic scent of wet stone and the horrific, sweet-rot stench of the cattle car. He feels the cold weight of the gold bar in his hand and the colder, more enduring weight of the film canister in his pocket. He hears not Olya's voice, but the absolute silence of the prisoners. and then the tearing sound of his truthful report being ripped in two. His face becomes a mask of pale, rigid stone. All the blood seems to drain from it, leaving his skin a waxy, translucent gray. The book slips from his fingers and thuds softly on the Persian rug. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, tighten, the knuckles standing out like white marbles against the spotted thin skin. "Olenka!" His voice, when it comes, is not his own. It is a dry, papery rasp, stripped of all its usual measured calm. It is the voice of a man standing at the edge of an abyss. "Stop this." The words are not a request. They are a command, flat and final, forged in the same steel as the orders he once gave in the war. But beneath the steel is a tremor of something else, a deep, visceral fear that is entirely alien to the composed grandfather she knows. Olya blinks, her enthusiasm crashing into bewildered hurt. She was expecting curiosity, perhaps scholarly skepticism, maybe even a proud smile at her diligence. She was not expecting this. This is a door slammed shut in her face. What? Why? This is important. This is history that's been buried. "It is a swamp," he interrupts, the volume rising, the rasp cutting through the room. He struggles to push himself up from the chair, his body trembling with the effort and the emotion. "You are digging in a swamp. You think you will find treasure? You will only find bones and mud. Dirty, sucking mud that will pull you down and never let go. There is no truth there. Only stories. Poisonous stories." He is standing now, leaning heavily on the chair back, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He is not looking at her anymore. He is staring through her, through the wall, back into that tunnel in 1945. He sees Gromov's pale, approving nod as he signed the lie. He feels the heat of the burning report on his face. The museum of his life, so carefully assembled, feels suddenly flimsy. A stage set threatening to collapse and reveal the rotting foundations beneath. "Forget this train," he whispers, the anger draining away, replaced by a desperate, almost pleading exhaustion. "Write about something else, something clean." He turns, moving with a slow, pained shuffle towards the sanctuary of his bedroom, leaving Olya alone in the living room. She stares at his retreating back, the shock on her face hardening into a new, determined confusion. The reaction was too violent, too personal, too specific. It wasn't the dismissal of a myth. It was the panic of a man who had seen a ghost he recognized intimately. Her eyes drift from the closed bedroom door to his pristine, ordered desk, to the glass case with its gleaming official medals, to the shelves of his own books, all narrating a safe, approved past. For the first time she sees it not as a museum, but as a fortress. A meticulously constructed fortress designed to keep something out, or to keep something in. The thrill of the historical chase transforms into a colder, more personal intrigue. The phantom train is no longer just a story in an archive, it is a key. And her grandfather, her stoic, orderly hero grandfather, has just shown her, in a moment of unvarnished terror, that he is desperately afraid of what that key might unlock. The hunt for a historical truth has just become a journey into the silent, haunted heart of the man she loves most. The silence Lev Berezhnoi left in the apartment was louder than any argument. It was a thick, charged substance, heavy with the unsaid. Olya sat motionless on the sofa, the blue glow of her laptop screen bleaching the color from her face. Her grandfather's reaction played on a loop in her mind. Not the words, but the physical collapse of him, the waxy pallor, the tremor in his hands, the voice that belonged not to her dedushka, but to a terrified young man in a different century. That was not the fear of a historian dismissing a myth. It was the visceral terror of a witness confronted with evidence he thought buried forever. His command to stop was not a boundary, it was a catalyst. It transformed her professional curiosity into a deeply personal, urgent mission. She needed to understand what lived in the shadows of that fear. She closed the German financial archives and opened a new, blank browser window. She was no longer searching for a train. She was searching for the ghost that haunted Lev Berezhnoi. Her first move was instinctive, a dive into the digital undergrowth where history is pieced together by amateurs and obsessives. Polish forums dedicated to wartime mysteries in Lower Silesia. Obscure blogs run by local historians scanning and uploading fragments of forgotten records. The chatter was a mix of wild speculation and tantalizing half-substantiated facts. She waded through tales of hidden SS treasure chambers, secret Nazi laboratories, and of course the Zet Otipochiji, the Golden Train. Most posts were rambling, poorly sourced. But then, in a dusty subforum, she found a user with the nondescript handle Searcher77. Searcher77 had, 3 years prior, uploaded a series of image files. The post was terse. From my late grandfather's effects. He was with the Polish First Army attached to Soviet rear units, May 45. He never spoke of it. Olya clicked. The images were scans of old, grainy, black and white photographs, the digital copies plagued by dust and scratch artifacts. They were not the work of an official army photographer. They were snatched, chaotic, framed by the uneven edges of a cheap personal camera. The first showed a group of Soviet soldiers in winter uniforms looking exhausted and bewildered, standing before the dark, gaping maw of a railway tunnel. The snow was incongruous. It had been May. Then she realized it wasn't snow. It was the chalky white dust of a recent explosion, coating the men and the ground. Her pulse quickened. She clicked the next image. A wider shot, taken from inside the tunnel. The arched stone ceiling. And there, receding into the profound darkness, was the unmistakable endless line of freight car roofs. The third image made her lean forward, her breath catching. A closer shot of men working with crowbars on a freight car door. The door was partly open, and spilling from the gap a chaotic, glittering cascade. Even through the poor resolution, the shapes were clear. Ornately curved handles of cups, the rough-hewn corners of bars, a tangled knot of chains and filigree. It was not orderly. It was a violent vomit of gold. The fourth image was different. It was a shot of papers, a close-up on a wooden crate stenciled with Gothic lettering. Part of the word Reichsbank was visible, and stamped in furious red ink across it, a Soviet military stamp and a handwritten notation in Cyrillic, Inyodoi, Nyan, 1705-45. Inspected, Sobes, 1705-45. Sobes, the Sobieski Massif. The location from the German memo. The date, days after the surrender of Berlin. It was real. The train was real. The gold was real. But it was the final image that froze the blood in her veins. It was a photograph of the photograph's own reverse side. Someone, likely Searcher77's grandfather, had written on the back in a tight Slavic script. The digital scan captured the indentations of the pen, the yellowing of the paper. The message was partial, torn. It read, Ni ethawuye, ai neo adiya ideasai. Wagon with people, like cattle, Gromov ordered. The words were a electric shock. Gromov. The name from her grandfather's wartime stories. The stern, respected Colonel Gromov. a background figure in tales of planning and logistics. Here he was, named in a whispered accusation on the back of a photograph, proving the existence of a ghost train. And worse, far worse, a wagon with people, like cattle. Her grandfather's horror collapsed into a new, sickening dimension. It wasn't just about gold. It was about people. Cargo. Olya's mind, trained for investigation, began to connect points with cold, dreadful logic. The train existed. Her grandfather was there. His reaction proved it. Gromov was there, giving orders. The official history had no record of this. Therefore, it was hidden, purposely erased. But why erase gold? Gold could be explained, redirected, repurposed. But people, a wagon of people carried on a treasure train, that was a different kind of secret. A toxic, screaming secret. She needed a modern vector, a name, Gromov. She opened a new search, moving from historical mud to the polished, treacherous ice of contemporary Russian wealth and power. She combined the surname with suffixes of modern privilege. Foundation, corporation, board of directors. It was like dropping a probe into a dark ocean. And then she found it. Not in a news article, but in the glossy, depthless digital brochure of a high-end Zurich auction house. A past auction from 5 years ago, titled The Collection of a Connoisseur, Numismatic Marvels. One lot was highlighted, a complete set of Prussian gold commemorative coins from the 1880s, originally part of the Hohenzollern family collection, lost during the Second World War. The provenance listed was chilling in its brevity. From the private collection of M.I. Gromov, thereafter, by descent. M.I. Gromov. Mikhail? Maxim? It didn't matter. The link was solid. A treasure from a lost German imperial collection, surfacing decades later in the private possession of the grandson of an NKVD colonel, who was on site at the disappearance of a train carrying that very same treasure. This was no longer a historical coincidence. This was a bloodline, a legacy. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling at this new thread. A few business registries, some obscured by shell companies, some brazenly open. Igor Gromov, chairman of Gromov Holdings. A man in his 50s, his face captured in the sterile photography of corporate websites and society galas. He had the cold, confident handsomeness of polished granite. Sharp cheekbones, hair silvered perfectly, eyes that looked at the camera with the utter assurance of ownership. His biography was a masterpiece of omission. Educated at prestigious institutions, a financial strategist, a patron of the arts, a man who moved between Moscow, London, and Geneva. Not a word about his grandfather, the colonel. The war was not a part of this carefully crafted story. But the wealth it seeded evidently was. Olya sat back, the pieces of the monstrous puzzle clicking together with an almost audible sound. The phantom train was no phantom. It was a concrete, historical event captured in stolen, dust-covered photographs. Its loot had not vanished into the ether of reconstruction. It had trickled down a specific pipeline from the hands of Colonel Vladimir Gromov in a smoky tunnel in 1945 to the auction catalogs and corporate portfolios of his grandson, Igor, today. And her grandfather, Lev Berezhnoy, the young idealistic captain, had been there at the source. He had been a part of the machine that made this transfer possible. His perfect ordered life, his museum of medals, was not just a quiet retirement. It was a citadel. A fortress of silence built to contain the screaming truth of that tunnel, the glittering stolen gold, and the dark human cargo it traveled with. She looked from the sleek, ruthless face of Igor Gromov on her screen to the closed door of her grandfather's bedroom. The chasm between the two men, one living in gilded, powerful silence, the other in austere, tormented silence, was the true story. And she was now standing on the narrow bridge between them. The academic hunt was over. She was no longer an observer. She had become a threat. The opulence of Igor Gromov's world was a calculated attack on the senses. It existed not in the old money grandeur of marble and gilt, but in the cool, intimidating language of the new global elite. His office occupied the entire top floor of a steel and glass monolith in Moscow City, a needle of light and ambition piercing the smoggy sky. The wall facing the door was a single, seamless sheet of tinted glass, framing a panoramic, almost imperial view of the sprawling metropolis below. The room itself was vast, minimally furnished with objects that were less furniture than sculptures. A desk that appeared to be a solid slab of fossilized black oak, chairs of brushed titanium, and black leather so soft it seemed to absorb light. The air was still, temperature-controlled, and carried the faint, clean scent of ozone and money. It was a room designed to communicate one thing: absolute, unassailable control. Olya felt the atmosphere press against her the moment the silent, impeccably dressed assistant ushered her in. Her own clothes, smart but off the rack, felt suddenly porous, inadequate against the room's sterile hostility. Igor Gromov did not rise from behind the monolithic desk. He was a man carved from the same material as his surroundings, sharp, polished, cold. His silver hair was a precise statement. His suit, dark and severe, hung on his frame with the silent authority of armor. He watched her cross the acres of polished concrete floor with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. He gestured to one of the titanium chairs. The movement was economical, devoid of warmth. "Olga Petrovna," he said. His voice was a surprise, not the booming baritone of a tycoon, but a calm, modulated tenor, every syllable placed with precision. It was a voice used to being listened to, a voice that never needed to raise itself. "Your emails were persistent. You have questions about my grandfather." It was not a question. It was a statement of territory. He had already defined the battlefield, the past, his lineage. She was not here as an investigator of a phantom train, but as a petitioner seeking a sliver of his personal history. She felt the narrative being gently, firmly wrested from her grasp. She sat, back straight, meeting his gaze. She spoke not of gold or trains, but of history, of gaps in the record, of the curious legend of the Sobieski train, and its possible connection to Soviet reconstruction efforts. She was careful, threading a path between implication and accusation. She mentioned the name of Colonel Vladimir Gromov, only as a figure who might have been involved in such logistical operations. Igor Gromov listened, his hands steepled before him, his expression one of polite, faintly bored attentiveness. When she finished, there was a silence that stretched, filled only by the imperceptible hum of the building's infrastructure. "My grandfather," he began, his tone shifting to one of reflective, almost scholarly reminiscence, "was a servant of the state, a complex man in complex times. He spoke rarely of the war. When he did, it was of sacrifice, of the immense, painful cost of victory, and the even greater burden of securing the peace." He leaned forward slightly, the black oak of the desk seeming to swallow the light between them. "If a train, laden with the plundered wealth of a criminal regime, was intercepted. Would it not be the height of responsibility to ensure that wealth served the people who had suffered most? To use it to rebuild shattered cities, to feed orphans, to forge the tools of a new society? Or should it have been left to rot in a tunnel, or worse, returned to the heirs of those who had orchestrated the genocide? His logic was a sleek, unbreakable blade. It reframed theft as stewardship, secrecy as patriotic duty. He was not defending a crime, he was articulating a harsh, pragmatic morality. "Captain Berezhnoi, your grandfather was a hero," he continued, the name dropping into the conversation with the weight of a finalized verdict. He understood duty. He understood that in the fog of war, clear lines are drawn not by philosophers, but by soldiers who must live with the consequences of their actions. To dig in this mud now, Olga Petrovna, it serves no one. It dishonors the difficult choices of brave men. It gives comfort only to those who would rewrite history to shame the victors. He offered her a smile then. It was a small, professional flex of facial muscles that did not reach his eyes. It was the most terrifying expression she had ever seen. "Your passion for history is commendable. Perhaps it could be channeled more productively. The Gromov Foundation funds many worthy historical initiatives. Archivists, researchers, they do vital work, with proper context, with guidance." The offer hung in the sterile air. It was not a bribe, it was an induction, a gentle, irrevocable absorption into his world, where history was not discovered, but curated, where her sharp, questioning mind would be given a comfortable, gilded cage and pointed towards acceptable targets. It was an offer of safety in exchange for silence, of career in exchange for complicity. It was the same offer his grandfather had made to hers 70 years prior, wrapped in new, polished language. She looked from his impassive face to the dizzying view of Moscow behind him. This city, this new Russia of glittering towers and deep, invisible currents, was built on secrets like his. He was not a rogue, he was a pillar, a guardian of the silence that greased the machinery of power from one generation to the next. To refuse him was not just to reject funding. It was to declare herself an enemy of a system far more vast and intricate than she had imagined. "I appreciate your time and your perspective," she said, her own voice sounding thin and young in the vast room. "But I am a journalist. My only guidance is the truth." The smile vanished, replaced by nothing. A smooth, blank placidity. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another degree. He had given her the chance to step gracefully onto his chessboard, and she had declined. The game, therefore, would change. "The truth," he echoed, the word tasting alien in his mouth. "A slippery thing. I wish you luck in your search, Olga Petrovna. Do give my regards to your grandfather, a true hero of a fading generation." The audience was over. The dismissal was absolute. The silent assistant materialized at her side to escort her out. The journey back across the concrete expanse felt infinitely longer. That evening, walking from the metro to her grandfather's apartment building through the familiar, dimly lit streets, the chill of Gromov's world still clung to her. She replayed the conversation, the offer, the threat veiled in courtesy. He had known everything. Her name, her grandfather, the train. Her investigation had never been a secret. She was a mouse who had wandered into a cat's terrarium, and the cat had simply watched, amused, before showing her the door. The attack when it came, was not from the shadows. It was brazen, clinical. Two men in dark, puffy jackets emerged from a parked van as she turned into her lane. They moved with coordinated purpose, not like thugs, but like technicians, performing an unpleasant but necessary task. One moved to block her path. The other, from behind, grabbed her shoulder bag strap, yanking it hard enough to spin her. The strap, tough leather, bit into her shoulder, but didn't break. She gasped, more in shock than pain, stumbling back against a brick wall. The man pulling her bag was focused, his face a mask of impersonal concentration. This wasn't a mugging for cash. It was a retrieval mission. The target was her laptop, her phone, her notes, the digital and physical evidence of her search. Just as a second, harder yank threatened to dislocate her shoulder, a voice, loud and rough with drink, boomed from a nearby doorway. "Hey! What the hell? Leave her alone!" A large, unshaven man in a worn coat, holding a bottle in a paper bag, weaved into the scene. He was a fixture of the neighborhood, a harmless drunk everyone ignored. But in that moment, he was an unforeseen variable, a burst of chaotic noise. The two technicians froze for a split second, their programmed efficiency disrupted by this ragged, shouting intervention. It was enough. Alla, adrenaline screaming through her, wrenched the bag free, clutched it to her chest, and ran. She didn't look back. She heard the drunk shouting again, a door slamming, an engine starting, and then fading. She fumbled with her keys at the apartment building's outer door, her hands shaking violently. Only when she was inside, the heavy door bolted shut behind her, leaning against the cool wall of the stairwell. Did she allow herself to breathe? The bag was safe, the data was safe, but her illusion of safety was gone. Igor Gromov had not been making a metaphorical point. He had shown her the first, gentle, gloved hand of his power. And when she refused it, he had, without a second thought, sent the other hand, bare-knuckled and swift, to take what he wanted. The climb to the 5th floor felt like an ascent, from one world to another, from the cold, violent calculus of Gromov's Moscow to the quiet, ordered museum of her grandfather's past. But the line between them, she now understood, was not a wall. It was a tunnel, a dark, 70-year-old tunnel through which the secrets of a gold train and the men who guarded them still traveled. And she had just stepped into its path. The apartment was a sanctuary that no longer sanctified. The familiar smells of old books, floor polish, and her grandfather's particular brand of cheap tea now felt like a fragile membrane stretched over a chasm. Olya stood just inside the door, her back against the solid wood, the strap of her bag still gripped in a white-knuckled fist. The physical shock of the attack was subsiding, replaced by a colder, more penetrating dread that seeped into her bones. The street had not been random. The men had been waiting. They wanted her research, her proof. Igor Gromov's polite corporate warning had a steel fist, and it had just swung. She could hear the soft rustle of a newspaper from the living room. The mundane sound was almost offensive. She pushed off from the door and walked in. Lev Berezhnoy sat in his armchair, a reading lamp casting a warm, yellow pool of light over the open pages of Izvestia. He looked up, and his eyes, those faded, intelligent eyes, immediately read the story written on her face. The pallor, the wild, unblinking stare, the tremor she could not suppress. He set the paper aside slowly, the motion deliberate, a ritual to buy a fraction of a second. "Olenka?" His voice was the gentle, aged rasp she knew, but beneath it, she now heard the ghost of the command from days before. The dam holding back her fear, her confusion, her anger, shattered. It came out not as a scream, but as a torrent of cold, hard facts, hurled across the quiet room like stones. She spoke of the auction catalogue, the Prussian gold coins from the Hohenzollern collection, the provenance line leading to M.I. Gromov. She described Igor Gromov's sterile, terrifying office, his revision of history, his offer of a gilded cage, and then the men by the van, the grab for her bag, the clinical purpose of it. They weren't thieves, she said, her voice trembling with a fury born of terror. They were archivists. They came to delete me. She expected denial. She expected more pleas to stop, appeals to her safety. What she did not expect was the profound, seismic collapse that occurred within the old man in the chair. Lev Berezhnoi did not move, but it was as if an internal structure, painstakingly maintained for 7 decades, gave way. The color drained from his face, leaving it the shade of old parchment. His shoulders, usually held with stubborn straightness, slumped forward as if under a sudden, intolerable weight. The carefully maintained facade of the retired historian, the war hero, the quiet grandfather, crumbled into dust. What remained was a man exposed, naked before the judgment of his own past. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not her Dedushka, but Captain Berezhnoi of Smersh, staring at the cattle car in the Sobieski tunnel. The horror in his eyes was not new. It was ancient, preserved in the amber of a lifetime of silence. He pushed himself up from the chair, a slow, painful unfolding. He did not speak. He moved past her, his slippers whispering on the parquet floor, and walked to his bedroom. She followed, hovering in the doorway, her anger melting into a bewildered, aching pity. He went not to a closet or a dresser, but to the one piece of furniture that seemed out of place in his austere room, a heavy, old-fashioned writing desk, its surface bare except for a simple green lamp. He knelt before it, his joints cracking in protest. And with a key he wore on a chain around his neck, he unlocked the single, small drawer. He did not rummage. He knew exactly what was inside. He withdrew a small, nondescript cardboard box, the kind that might hold stationery. It was dusty, the corners softened with age. He placed it on the desk with a reverence bordering on terror, as if handling a live shell. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were 2 objects. The first was a small metal canister for 35mm film, its surface dulled by time and the oil of countless anxious touches. The second was a single black and white photograph, its edges brittle. He picked up the photograph first. His hands, spotted and veined, trembled violently. He did not look at it. He simply held it out to her. Olya took it. The image was grainy, shot from an awkward angle with poor light. But its content was unmistakable. It was the interior of a railway wagon, not the one spilling gold. This was a different darkness. The flashlight beam illuminated a chaos of thin, striped limbs and hollow faces. A man was half-turned towards the camera, his arm raised, not in greeting, but in a feeble, instinctive warding-off gesture. His eyes were 2 dark pits of exhausted comprehension. In the foreground, slightly blurred, were the hands of the photographer. Young, strong hands gripping the camera. Her grandfather's hands. The photograph was not just evidence, it was a cry frozen in silver nitrate. It confirmed the scrawled words on the back of the Polish soldier's picture. A wagon with people, like cattle. It was the truth Gromov had ordered burned. Then Lev took the film canister. He held it in his palm, his fingers closing around it as if around the holy relic of a dead faith. His voice, when it finally came, was a dry, broken thing, eroded by the sands of silence. He told me it was for the state, he began, not looking at her, but at the canister in his hand. That the gold was a shield, a weapon for the motherland, broken and bleeding. And I wanted to believe. We had seen so much horror. What was one more compromise? One more secret? If it helped us build something better? He closed his eyes, a spasm of pain crossing his face. But it was not a shield. It was a poison. And we were not builders. We were grave diggers. We buried the truth with the treasure. He spoke then, in a low, relentless monotone, of the tunnel. Not the legend, but the grimy, stinking reality. The crushing weight of the plundered gold, the obscenity of art stacked like firewood, and then finding them, the living cargo. The moment his understanding of the war, of his own role in it, had fractured irreparably. He described Gromov's arrival, the pale administrative face that saw only assets and problems, the ripping up of the true report, the order to hand over the camera, the separate, unmarked lorries, the signing of the lie. I took this, he whispered, holding up the canister. One roll. I told myself it was for history, for justice. But I was a coward. I kept it hidden. I built this. He gestured weakly around him, at the apartment, at the life she knew. This monument to a lie. I let them rewrite me. I traded my soul for a quiet life, and I called it survival. He turned his shattered gaze to her. The guilt in his eyes was a living thing, corrosive and deep. He offered you money, a job. Yes? It is the same offer. The Gromovs, they are a system. They take the truth, and they give you a comfortable story in return. And if you refuse, he nodded towards the door, towards the street where the men had waited. They take that too. The final piece of the jigsaw snapped into place with a sound that echoed in Olya's soul. Her grandfather was not a bystander. He was a participant, a coerced, traumatized, morally broken participant, but a participant nonetheless. His entire life since that day in May 1945 had been a penance, served in silence, a life sentence for the crime of bearing witness, and then agreeing to pretend he had seen nothing. The medals in the glass case were not trophies. They were the bars of his gilded, self-constructed cage. His meticulous scholarship was not a passion, but a frantic, lifelong attempt to atone by chronicling other, safer truths. The anger she had felt towards him evaporated, replaced by a vast, sorrowful understanding. He was a man who had been broken by a secret too big for one conscience to hold. And now, that secret, in the form of a ruthless heir and a handful of digital ghosts, had come to claim its due from the next generation. He pushed the box towards her, the canister rolling softly against the photograph. "Take it," he said, the words a final, exhausted exhalation. "Take it all. Publish it. Let them know what was in that tunnel. Not just the gold. Them." His eyes flickered to the photograph. Do what I did not have the courage to do. Break the silence. In that moment, the roles reversed completely. The protector became the protected. The keeper of secrets became the plea for exposure. The weight of the truth, carried alone for 70 years, was now passed into her hands. It was no longer a historical puzzle. It was a legacy of shame, a testament to horror, and a final desperate weapon against the elegant, enduring power of the Gromovs. The war was not over. It had just entered a new, decisive, and deeply personal phase. The objects from the cardboard box, the film canister cold and heavy as a stone, the photograph brittle as a fallen leaf, burned in Olya's possession. They were no longer mere evidence. They were a sacred, terrifying inheritance. Her grandfather's crippled conscience made physical. Publishing them immediately online, screaming the truth into the digital void, felt rash, like scattering precious gunpowder on the wind. The story needed armor. It needed an unassailable foundation in the official record, a crack in the state's own meticulously constructed edifice of silence. She needed to find the ghost in the machine. Her contact was a man named Anton, a senior archivist at a state institute for military history. He was a relic of a different breed. A scholar first, a bureaucrat, a distant second. His life dedicated to the dusty scent of cellulose and the slow, patient assembly of the past's true shape. Over years of researching other stories, Olya had earned his wary trust, a bond built on shared frustration with redacted lines and lost files. He was her skeleton key to the labyrinth of stamped and sanctioned memory. She met him not at his imposing institutional office, but in the back corner of a cavernous, Soviet-era cafe near the Kievsky railway station, a place frequented by pensioners and students, where the clatter of dishes and the murmur of 100 private conversations provided a perfect sonic veil. Anton was a nervous man, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that constantly scanned the room, as if expecting the filing cabinets of his life to come and reclaim him. She placed a plain folder on the sticky Formica table. Inside were not the original artifacts, but crisp digital prints, the photograph of the cattle car, and a scan of the auction catalog page with the Gromov provenance. She said nothing about her grandfather. She framed it as she had for Gromov, a historical inquiry, a dangling thread. The Sobieski train, the discrepancy between German records and Soviet silence, the curious modern reappearance of looted items. But this time, she had the key. She slid a piece of paper across the table. On it were two things: the exact military grid reference for the tunnel from her grandfather's map, and a single powerful name, Colonel Vladimir Gromov, NKVD, attached to the First Ukrainian Front, May 1945. Anton looked at the name, and a profound, professional weariness settled over his face. It was the look of a man who knew precisely which doors were locked, and more importantly, why. But he also looked at the photograph of the prisoners. His eyes lingered on the hollow faces, the raised, warding arm. He was a historian of troop movements and tank battles. This was a different kind of warfare, documented in a single, illicit frame. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He would look. Accessing the file took him 3 days. The delay, he explained in a terse, encrypted message, was not due to its secrecy level, but to its curious nature. It was not classified as top secret or of special importance. It was, according to the registry, a mundane file on logistical captures and allocations, spring 1945. Its obscurity was its protection. Olya met him again, this time in the echoing, marble-lined lobby of his institute after hours. He handed her a reader's pass and led her to a silent, deserted sub-basement reading room, a cathedral of forgotten paper. He placed a single, thin dossier on the desk before her. The cover was faded green cardstock. The typed label matched his description. It felt too light to contain the gravity she sought. She opened it. The first pages were administrative boilerplate. Then the interim report on secured enemy assets, Region 8. The location was the Sobieski Massif Tunnel. The date was 18 May 1945. The reporting officer's signature was a sharp, familiar flourish. Captain L. Berezhnoy, Smersh. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the official lie. The report described in dry, lifeless prose the discovery of a stationary German freight train containing industrial machine parts, electrical components, and non-ferrous scrap metal suitable for smelting. It noted, no personnel present at time of securing. It was a masterpiece of erasure. Every word her grandfather had confessed to signing was here, carved into the official history. Seeing his signature, that sharp young man's signature, on this sanitized fiction, was a visceral blow. It was the moment of his capitulation, fossilized. But Anton had not brought her here for the lie. He pointed a trembling finger to the bottom of the final page. Below her grandfather's signature, in a different, tighter script, was a routing stamp and a handwritten resolution. The stamp was from the office of the deputy head of the NKVD's Trophy Brigade. The resolution, in red ink, was brief and devastating. Allocate special cargo from Lot SS7, see attached manifest fragment, to Department I for immediate processing and secure storage. Handle per directive, 4447G, Gromov, Kolo. Attached with a rusting paperclip was a single frayed sheet, the manifest fragment. It was a carbon copy, faint and ghostly, of a German inventory list. It itemized in precise Gothic type, not scrap metal, but 74 gold bars, 12 kilo each, 45 crates, ecclesiastical precious metals, 18 containers, numismatic collections, Hohenzollern, Wetten, and at the bottom, a final stark entry, Transport Group 44, 35 units, special handling. 35 units. The number from her grandfather's original burned report. The number of souls in the cattle car. The document was a schizophrenic artifact. The front page, Berezhnoy's report, was the perfect lie for the file. The attached fragment and the resolution were the brutal internal truth for the select few. The receipt for the stolen goods and the human currency. Gromov had not even bothered to hide it completely. He had simply buried it behind the lie, confident no one would ever have the will or the key to juxtapose the two. The system's cynicism was breathtaking. Olya's hands were ice cold. She fumbled for her phone, her personal camera. Anything to capture this. As she focused on the damning resolution, the reading room door opened with a soft click. Anton stiffened like a hunted animal. A security guard in an ill-fitting uniform stood there, not the usual drowsy pensioner, but a younger alert man. He did not enter. He simply said, "Comrade Archivist, a telephone call for you. In the director's office. It is urgent." The blood drained from Anton's face. The call was not urgent. It was a summons. The silent alarm on the file had been tripped. Its obscurity was a trap, not a shield. It was a wire attached to a bell in a distant, powerful office. Someone, somewhere, had been waiting for this exact query. He looked at Olya, his eyes wide with apology and fear. He gave a tiny, sharp jerk of his head towards the door behind the guard. The back way. There was no time. She snatched the two most critical pages, the front sheet with her grandfather's signature, and the final page with the resolution and manifest fragment. She didn't bother with the rest. She shoved the loose pages into her bag, not caring about order or preservation. Anton, moving with a sudden, desperate energy, scooped up the remaining dossier and shuffled quickly towards the guard, his body a feeble, deliberate shield. Olya turned, and ran through a rear archway Anton had indicated, finding herself in a narrow, dimly lit service corridor lined with pipes. She ran, the slap of her boots echoing off the concrete walls. She burst out through a heavy fire door into a dark, narrow alley behind the institute, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She did not stop. She plunged into the labyrinth of side streets, her bag clutched tightly to her chest, the stolen papers crackling inside like agitated leaves. She knew the neighborhood, but every parked car, every figure in a doorway, was now a potential threat. The calm, surgical retrieval attempt on the street had failed. Now she had stolen directly from the memory palace of the state. The response would be less precise, more brutal. She used every evasive tactic she knew, doubling back, cutting through courtyards, ducking into a busy supermarket, and leaving by a different exit. The specter of the two men from the van now multiplied into a faceless, omnipresent apparatus. Gromov's power was not just in his wealth or his thugs. It was in the very architecture of the past, in files that called for help when disturbed. She was not just being chased. She was being exorcised from a history she was not meant to know. Breathless, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, she finally reached her grandfather's building. She took the stairs, 2 at a time, the adrenaline burning in her legs. Only when she was fumbling the key into the lock of apartment 17, the familiar, shabby wood of the door before her, did she allow herself to believe she might have made it. But the sanctuary was an illusion. She had brought the ghost home. And this time, it was not a memory in an old man's mind. It was a physical, incriminating piece of paper, signed in red ink by Colonel Gromov, and it was burning a hole in her bag. The archival trap had been sprung, and she was now the quarry, carrying the evidence that could damn a dynasty, right into the heart of the very silence it was meant to preserve. The silence in the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was the high-pitched, vibrating silence of a plucked string before it snaps. Olya stood in the dim hallway, her back against the locked door, listening to the frantic echo of her own heart. The stolen archive pages in her bag felt less like paper and more like shards of radioactive metal, poisoning the familiar air. She had crossed the final, uncrossable line, not just investigating a secret, but physically stealing its official receipt. The system would now respond not with hired muscle in a back alley, but with its full, legitimized fury. Light spilled from the living room. She found Lev Berezhnoi not in his armchair, but standing at the window, peering through a sliver in the blinds into the dark street below. He had changed. The broken confessional man from the night before was gone. In his place was someone she had only glimpsed in old photographs. A soldier. His posture was rigid, his bearing taut, all traces of frail old age burned away by a cold, resurrected alertness. He was scanning the terrain, assessing threats. The return of his war self was more frightening than his collapse. He turned as she entered. His eyes, that pale, watery gray, were now the color of winter ice. They swept over her, taking in her disheveled hair, her heaving chest, the protective clutch of her bag. He did not need an explanation. He saw the chase on her face. "They know," she gasped, the words raw. "The file. It had an alarm on it. They came for Anton." She pulled the crumpled pages from her bag, holding them out like a bloody trophy. "Gromov's order. The real manifest. It's here." He took the pages. His hands, which had trembled so violently over the photograph, were now steady as stone. He read the sanitized lie of his own signature, then the damning red ink resolution below. His face showed no surprise, only a grim, final confirmation. This was the physical proof of the cage he had lived in. The signature was his prison bars. Gromov's note was the warden's seal. Outside, a car door slammed with a solid, expensive thud. Then another. Not the screech of police vehicles, but the quiet, authoritative purr of powerful engines coming to a stop. Berezhnov's head snapped up. The soldier's instincts were fully awake. He moved to the window, peered out again, then turned back to her. His decision made in a fraction of a second. "They are not here for the papers," he said, his voice low and stripped of all its aged rasp. It was Captain Berezhnoy's voice. "They are here to contain the story, to contain us." He crossed the room to his writing desk with a speed that belied his years. From the same hidden drawer that held the past, he now withdrew the future. He placed the small cardboard box containing the film canister and the original photograph into her hands, then closed her fingers around it. The gesture was not tender. It was a transfer of command. "You must go, now, out the back, through the basement to the courtyard next door. Do not run until you are 2 streets over. Then you get this to your editor. You publish everything. The picture, the film. These." He gestured to the archive pages. "You tell them about the gold, and you tell them about the 35 units." She shook her head, a protest rising in her throat. "I'm not leaving you with them." "You are." The command cracked through the room, absolute and unyielding. It was the voice that had ordered men into fire. "This is not a discussion, Olenka. This is the objective. The evidence must survive. I am collateral. I have been collateral since 1945. My purpose now is to give you time." Footsteps, measured and unhurried, sounded in the stairwell outside. Not a pounding raid, but a confident, inevitable approach. One set of footsteps. He was coming alone. An oligarch does not bring witnesses. Berezhnov's eyes softened for a fleeting second. He placed a hand on her cheek, a rough, papery touch. "You break the silence. For me. For them." He nodded to the photograph in the box. Then he pushed her firmly towards the narrow hallway that led to the kitchen and the service door. "Go." She went. Her mind was a storm of terror and duty, but her body obeyed. She slipped through the kitchen, unlatched the old, paint-sealed door to the back stair, and vanished into the dark, dank well of the building's underbelly, just as the front doorbell rang. A single, polite, piercing chime. Lev Berezhnoy took a deep, steadying breath. He straightened his worn cardigan. He picked up the 2 archive pages from the table, the proof of his complicity and Gromov's crime, and placed them neatly in the center of his pristine blotter. Then he walked to the front door and opened it. Igor Gromov stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 of the same efficient, impassive men from the office. He wore a long black cashmere coat over his suit. He looked like a man arriving for a somber business meeting, not a confrontation. His eyes, however, held no polished courtesy now. They were flat, like chips of obsidian. "Captain Berezhnoy," Gromov said, his modulated voice soft in the quiet hall. "A privilege to meet a legend at last. May we come in? There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding state archives." Berezhnov did not move from the doorway. He looked past Gromov, at the hired sentinels, then back into the cold, handsome face of the heir. He saw the grandfather in him, the same ruthless certainty, the same belief that the world was clay to be shaped by men like them. But he also saw something Vladimir Gromov never needed: the petulant anger of a man whose perfect control was being frayed. "There is no misunderstanding," Lev said, his voice quiet but clear. "Your grandfather stole gold, and he stole people, and you have been living off the interest." A faint muscle twitched in Gromov's jaw. The civilized script was being discarded. He stepped forward, forcing Berezhnoi to retreat into the apartment. His men followed, closing the door, sealing the space. Gromov's eyes scanned the room, the museum of a lie, before landing on the 2 pages on the desk. He did not look surprised. He looked inconvenienced. "My grandfather," Gromov said, moving to stand over the desk, "secured the resources a shattered nation needed to survive. He made difficult choices in a time you, in your comfortable retirement, cannot fathom. He built a foundation. I have merely stewarded it." He picked up the page with the red resolution, examined it with a dismissive sniff. "This is a fragment, an administrative ghost. It proves nothing but the chaos of war." "It proves your bloodline is built on a crime," Berezhnoi said, standing his ground in the center of his own living room. "And I am a witness." Gromov turned, a cold smile playing on his lips. "A witness who signed a report, calling it scrap metal. A co-conspirator, by any legal definition. Your credibility died with your signature in 1945, old man." He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward and collected both pages from the desk. "We are here to correct a historical error, to recover stolen documents, to ensure a respected veteran is not exploited by reckless journalists with agendas." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Where is your granddaughter, Captain? Where has she gone with her souvenirs?" Lev said nothing. He held Gromov's gaze, a lifetime of shame and secrecy finally crystallizing into a pure, defiant silence. On the antique television in the corner, forgotten and muted, the nightly news broadcast played. The anchor's mouth moved silently through reports on diplomacy and stock prices. Then, the screen changed. A familiar logo, the emblem of Olya's online publication, appeared beside the anchor's head. A graphic with the words, "Breaking a Lost Train of the Reich," flashed. Gromov's head turned, following Berezhnoi's sudden, fixed stare. He saw the logo. He saw the anchor's face grow serious, her expression shifting into the grave mode reserved for major disclosures. He took a hurried step towards the television, fumbling for the remote control on a side table, his composure cracking. He found the button. Sound erupted into the room. "Just published an extensive investigation based on newly uncovered photographic evidence and archival documents detailing the 1945 discovery by Soviet forces of a so-called Nazi gold train in Poland. The report alleges the train contained not only looted bullion and priceless art, but also prisoners from concentration camps. Crucially, the investigation traces a path from this seizure to a modern-day fortune, implicating the family of the late NKVD Colonel Vladimir Gromov in the disappearance of these assets. We have reached out to representatives of the Gromov family for comment." The anchor's voice continued, but the words became a blur. On screen, a flicker of the stolen photograph appeared, the stark, ghastly image of the cattle car interior. Then, a scan of the auction catalog page. Then, a dramatic zoom on the red-inked resolution. "Handle per directive, 447G Gromov Kolo." Igor Gromov stood motionless, the remote dangling from his hand. The blood had drained from his face, leaving a stark, waxy mask. He was not seeing a news report. He was watching the meticulously constructed edifice of his legitimacy, his power, his very identity, crumble live on national television. The elegant narrative of stewardship was incinerated in the raw light of those images. He was no longer a titan. He was a thief's grandson, his wealth stained with blood and secrecy. He turned slowly from the screen. The polished corporate air was gone. What remained was raw, livid, and dangerously cornered. He looked at Lev Berezhnoi with pure, undiluted hatred. "You stupid old fool," he breathed. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Lev Berezhnoi looked past him, at the television, at the ghost from the tunnel, finally speaking to the world. He felt no triumph, only a vast, hollow exhaustion and a fragile thread of relief. The silence was broken. "I have finished my duty," Lev said quietly. Gromov stared at him for a long, seething moment. The two henchmen shifted, waiting for an order that no longer mattered. The violence in the room had been rendered obsolete by the violence of the broadcast. Anything they did now would only add a bloody postscript to a story that was already racing around the globe. With a sound of utter disgust, Gromov turned on his heel. He strode towards the door, his men falling in behind him. He did not look back. The apartment door opened and shut with a soft, final click. The sudden quiet was immense. The news report moved on to the weather. Lev Berezhnoi did not move. He stood in the center of the room, listening to the echo of the departing footsteps fade. He then walked slowly to his armchair and lowered himself into it, his body suddenly feeling every one of its 95 years. He looked around his museum. The medals in the case gleamed dully under the lamplight. The books stood in silent, orderly rows. It was all a shell now, a hollow exhibit. The real artifact, the truth he had carried and then released, was now out in the world, doing its terrible, necessary work. He did not know what would come next. Investigations? Scandals? Perhaps nothing at all. But the record was no longer a lie. The ghost train had reached its final destination, not in a secret warehouse, but in the public consciousness. The reckoning he had feared for a lifetime had arrived, and he was still here to face it. Not as a hero, not as a coward, but simply as a witness who had, at last, finished his testimony. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 70 years, the face of the man in the cattle car did not look at him with accusation, but seemed, finally, to be at rest. The long, cold war of memory was over.